Nice to see you. You sit here if you want. Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to the Education Decision meeting. I'm Susie Horton. I'm the Cabinet Member for Education. And there's a couple of people who are on their way, but we'll go around and introduce the people who are here now, and then we'll add in the other people when they come. Do you want to start with you?
Councillor Tom Coles, Opposition Spokesperson for Education.
I'm Bev Pennicott, Finance Manager for Children, Families and Education.
I'm Alison Edgerton. I'm the Group Accountant for Children's, Families and Education.
I'm Julia Catherine. I'm Head of Inclusion within Education.
I'm David Pennant, Democratic Services.
We've also got Fiona Callaghan from the news back there. And do you just want to introduce yourself?
Sorry for being late.
That's all right. No, just press the button and then just say who you are.
I'm Anthony Harper, I'm the Early Years Service Lead.
Thank you. Just press the button off. Okay, so we'll do a bit of housekeeping now. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery. Just got Fiona over there. By the stairwells, do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices, where we're back there now the ice rink's gone. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and the recording will be on the council's website. Members of the public who aren't here, but permitted to record the meeting, etc., etc. So, finally, may I ask everyone to use the microphones provided when they are speaking, and remember to turn them off afterwards. Fantastic. Okay, without further ado, we will go to apologies for absence.
None.
So no apologies for absence. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Mike? That's okay.
Yeah, Mike Stoneman, Deputy Director, Education.
Who's on his third meeting of the day already. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest?
I'm on the Academy Advisory Board at Penhale Infant School.
And I don't know whether I normally do this. I do it at other meetings. I'm on the governing body at Craneswater Junior School as well. Okay, without further ado, we hand over to the very straightforward report on the school funding arrangements and dedicated schools grant budget to Bev.
Thank you very much. It's a lengthy report. I will try to summarise it as succinctly as possible. The report provides an update on funding arrangements for schools in 2019-20 following the publication of our settlement by the government on the 17th of December. We're seeking a range of approvals which are necessary to allocate funding next year. Cabinet member has already made a number of decisions on the funding formula for next year, and those are set out at paragraphs 3.3 and 3.4. Please note the recommendation at paragraph 3.3c, which is to maintain the minimum funding guarantee at minus 1.5%, because I will come back to that later in the report. Just to remind you of the background and recent context, the pressures on the high needs budget continue to grow, and when we sat here this time last year, we were unable to balance the high needs block. We're about £400,000 short. It was agreed that we would use DSG balances brought forward to support the costs in 2018-19 whilst a review took place. That review has taken place, but high needs pressures actually are a national issue, not just a Portsmouth issue. And on 16th of December, Secretary of State announced an additional £250 million to support high needs. And that translated for Portsmouth to an additional £464,668 in 2018-19 and again in 2019-20. So following that statement, as I said, the DSG was announced on the 17th of December, including high needs, schools block, central schools block, and the details of that settlement are shown at the table just at the bottom of paragraph 5.5. So you can see in total 151,991,000. If we move on to the schools block now, the government has provided schools block funding for all mainstream schools to receive at least the minimum funding level, and minimum funding levels are set out at paragraph 6.6 for each type of school. Sorry, 6.5, can't read my own writing. And for all schools to receive funding of at least 1% per pupil above the 2017-18 baselines, which is a little bit obviously 2 years ago, although there was no expectation set by the government that actually local authorities should implement that specifically in that way. Basically, the schools block settlement is good news, and it's allowed us flexibility to increase funding to mainstream schools. And the proposed formula is set out in the APT, which is to be submitted to the the Authority Pro Forma tool, which is to be submitted to Education Skills and Funding Agency by the 21st of January, and that is at Appendix 6. The features of the formula are we have implemented those minimum funding levels at paragraph 6.5. The secondary schools, all of the unit values remain at the national funding formula rates. The primary unit values, because if you remember we were moving towards NFF rates, where the primary unit values were below NFF, we've been able to increase those up to the NFF rates. And where they were above NFF rates, we have kept those at the rates that we consulted with when we went to consultation with schools in last spring. They are on the downward trajectory to bring them down towards NFF rates. If you want to see what those rates are easily, they are all at Appendix 2 for primary and secondaries. 4 schools in total benefited from the additional funding to reach those minimum funding levels that are set out in 6.5, and they were our our least deprived schools, where they don't get additional top-up funding through some of the prior attainment and deprivation factors and so on. So that was good news for them. We did look at using this funding floor mechanism that relates back to 17-18, but the results were patchy because of changes in pupils and data. So we're now proposing, instead of that previously agreed minus 1.5% minimum funding guarantee, we're able to propose a positive minimum funding guarantee of 0.5%. So all schools get 0.5% per pupil above last year's rates. Altogether, the proposals for mainstream have allowed us to pass an additional £2.034 million to mainstream schools, and that's an average of £81.45 per pupil. Moving on to growth, which is starts at 6.15 paragraph. Sorry. The DfE is now calculating local authorities' growth funding on a new basis, and they're looking at pupil growth over the previous year by middle super output area, and then they're giving a unit value. I think it's generally a fairer way of allocating funding to local authorities, but of course we've already funded the schools for the growth that we're now just getting the funding for, so it's retrospective. Yeah. As our overall growth slows, then obviously our allocations of growth funding will slow down, although in the short term our commitment for growth funding for secondary schools in particular will continue to rise, because our little bulge we've mostly funded in primary is now moving through to secondary. Our big bulge. Our bulge is moving forward to secondary, so we need to start to fund the secondaries. We'll shortly be consulting with schools about how to allocate growth funding for the academic year starting in September. But we've allowed for a small increase in our current rates, and we're proposing a growth fund of £754,400, which we believe is sufficient, more than sufficient. Next area is the Central School Services block, which is at section 7. That's increased slightly, not a great deal. It's in line with pupil numbers, and where we've had an increase, those increases have been applied to the budget headings within the Central Schools Services block to reflect inflation mostly. The budgets include the national licence, which is negotiated by ESFA, and the list of the licences negotiated are at 7.2, and they will just bill us basically for how much we have to pay. So that's Central Schools block. Moving on to early years now. The funding allocations to us remain the same, and it's an hourly rate. We get £4.69 for 3 and 4 year olds per hour, and £5.43 for 2 year olds. Obviously, there's very little flexibility within that, but nevertheless, we've been reviewing the component rates within the overall allocations to try to increase funding, direct funding to settings. It has been possible, and we've looked at this carefully, so we've been able to reduce the growth fund for 3 and 4 year olds, and therefore increase the basic rate that goes out to settings. And we've also reduced central funding slightly, and these measures have allowed us to increase the rate for 3 and 4 year olds by 8 pence per hour, and by 1 pence per hour for 2 year olds, because we need to keep money in the growth funding for the 2 year olds. And the proposed early years rates are all at Appendix 3. If you would like to see those, it shows you how our national rate is allocated over settings. And then the high needs. The simple bit. As I said, we originally anticipated a deficit of around about £400,000 for 2018-19 and ongoing. So officers started to consult with schools to consider how we could manage that pressure. A set of actions were agreed back in the autumn, which were intended to be implemented in 2019-20. Those actions are all set out at paragraph 3.4. But despite this, actually our initial projections for next year still suggested a shortfall of around about 350,000, which is clearly a problem. Following Secretary of State's announcement, however, and we've got the additional funding that he's given us, so we have been able to relax some of the proposed measures. So we now believe that we will be in, or rather, we won't be in deficit in 2018-19, and we had a very small surplus for 19-20, which has allowed us to relax some measures. So for the mainstream EHCP bands and the inclusion centre bands as well, we've been able to increase 3 of those 4 bands. And also we were proposing to reduce special school funding bands by 1% per band. And at this stage we're proposing that they could be deferred for 1 year to be reviewed for 2021. The band rates are all set out in Appendix 5. Quite aside from all of this, Flying Ball Academy advised us in the autumn that their current top-up rates for their alternative provision was not covering the costs of the increasingly complex pupils that are placed with them. The top-up was £4,638. They provided a business case which we reviewed, and actually agreed that it would be reasonable from September to increase that top-up to £6,000 per pupil. But as I said, that's all set out in Appendix 5. Also on the high needs, there are some minor changes proposed to the place numbers that we commission, and then we've also added in the full year effect of some changes that we made in inclusion centres and so on last year. The place numbers are all in Appendix 4, and full details of the changes that we made are all in the report. Other high needs issues, out-of-city placements. Current usage is increasing, costs are increasing, so we've needed to increase the budget next year by £216,000 for out-of-city. That's about 10% of the budget. And there's also a projected increase of around about £115,000 for the cost of post-16 top-ups, because we're seeing an increasing number in colleges. All of the changes that I've talked about here are reflected in the proposed DSG budget, which is at Appendix 1, which we'll ask you to approve later. What I would say is that this budget doesn't currently include any savings that might arise from the proposed closure of Willows. If and when that is approved, we'll be able to revise the budget and we'll bring a revised budget for approval. In the meantime, apart from the ongoing potential savings from Willows, we anticipate that Willows may, and it is a may, leave behind a deficit of up to £100,000 when they close, and it's likely that we will seek approval to fund that deficit from the DSG if that becomes necessary. At this stage, it's expected that DSG will have a balance carried forward at the end of 2018-19 of around about £2 million, and which, if you allow for carrying forward the school-specific contingency, which has already been agreed, this is at paragraph 10.4, and also allow of this up to £100,000 for a potential liability at Willows, that leaves a reserve of around about £1.75 million. It's recommended this is carried forward to help with the continued implementation of NFF and to support any future financial pressures arising during the year.
Thank you, Bev. That is, we know that this is a really complex financial report, and you made it as straightforward and simple as possible. Can I just ask if anyone else wants to make... I've got a few things I want to say, but I just want to see if anyone else wants to make any comments. Did you follow that? It's a challenge one. Alice, you don't want to say anything? No one else wants... Mike? No?
Not at this stage, no.
No. Okay, so the thing that I just want to say, well, first of all, thank you. And also the timings of these, they come in just before, as everyone's going off for Christmas. And then we have this pressure of when they have to be reported. So I do want to give my thanks publicly to the finance officers who've been working hard on this. There are so many variables, and they don't always come in the order that you want. So thank you very much. That's the first thing I want to say. The other thing I think I want to say is it's kind of a good news story that's not a good news story. I don't think that we can forget the fact that of all the pressures that schools are under and the changing landscape where it seems to be that the demands, particularly in special educational needs, are going up. So of course it's nice to receive some money, but I don't want to oversell it as a brilliant story. It gets us out of a situation this year, but when you look at projections, it's not easy going forward. So that was the main points that I wanted to make. The other thing is I think we can't forget that we're always moving to the national funding formula. So this money that's been carried over is mitigating against or helping schools transition to that in the fairest possible way, and it is the fairest possible way. And the last point that I want to make is that actually for us, we can use that money very profitably and actually hand it back to schools where there are other places around the country where actually it's just filling a big black hole. So we are able to give extra money to schools, moving forward in the short term, which of course is a positive thing in itself. So they're the main points that I wanted to make. Is there anyone else now want to say anything? Or should we move on to the next? No? Thank you. So I've got to go through here. Okay, let me go back to I'm going to take them systematically. Sorry, I know there's a lot, but I want to make sure that we do this properly. So, the first one. So, approve the determination of the 2019-20 schools budget. Including the individual schools' budget shown in Appendix 1 together with the supporting explanations contained within this report, which I'm happy to do. Endorse the amount of the growth fund for 2019-20 at 754,400, which I'm happy to do. to endorse. Approve the proposed changes to the mainstream schools revenue funding formula as set out in section 6, which is happy to do. Approve the school revenue funding pro forma appendix 6 with submission to the ESFA, which has to be done by the 21st of January. I'm happy to do. And approve the 2019-20 Special School Inclusion Centre and Alternative Provision Places as set out in Appendix 4. Now, the next bit is where I'm going to propose not to approve this today, which is the Element 3 top-ups. And the reason is it's purely an order of meetings. There's been a head teachers meeting this morning, which I was there, and obviously there was some discussion about this, but tonight is the schools forum meeting, and I would like to be able to move forward with this decision, having sat through a schools forum meeting, listened to the head teachers about their views on what happens with this Element 3 top-up. So I've got a little bit of an idea of what heads think from this morning, but I would feel more comfortable if that decision was made having consulted with schools forum. And whether that is that decision comes back to a meeting that we schedule after today, or whether it goes to the February meeting, I will take advice and guidance on how important that is, because if it means that there's a delay to getting some of these sorted and things moving forward, then I think we need to do it sooner rather than later. But there may be an extra meeting. If not, it will go to the February meeting. So I won't be approving that today. So approve the proposal that any carry forward balances from 2080 be used to assist with the continued introduction of the funding reform changes. Yes, and approve the local funding arrangements in respect to the 2, 3 and 4-year-old early years provision as set out in that section. Yes. So they are the decisions made. So apart from that, approving the Element 3 top-up rates, I'm happy to endorse and approve the rest. Does anyone want to make any comments on that? Okay. That's that one done. So, the next item on the agenda, which is agenda item 4, is the proposal to close Willow Centre for Children, which was the outcome of a pre-statutory consultation. Who is presenting this?
Yep, that's going to be me. Okay, so as you just said, Susie, this is the findings really from the pre-statutory consultation that we undertook last term to close Willow Centre for Children, but to continue to deliver that specialist provision provided by Willows as part of an expanded Cliffdale Primary Academy, which is operated under the Solent Academies Trust. A bit of background for you, which I'll just briefly go through. So Willows Centre for Children is a maintained special school which offers specialist early years and primary phase education. It is, in fact, I think probably unique in that I think it's the only maintained specialist nursery school in the country. So that's an interesting point to note. And all the pupils that are placed at Willows are placed there by the local authorities. We are the commissioning authority for the special school places. We've worked with the governing board of Willows to look at how we continue to deliver the provision at Willows, bearing in mind the concerns we have about the future viability of Willows, and also in terms of the provision that's there. And reluctantly, the governors came to the conclusion that it would be in the best interests of pupils at Willows and future provision that they become part of the Solent Academies Trust under this expanded Cliffdale primary model. But to do that, we had to go through a statutory process, and as the decision maker, it's with the local authority to make that decision around the closure of that school. And so we've started that process, and this is around the stage 1 of it, the pre-statutory consultation, which commenced on the 15th of October and concluded on the 10th of December. And during that time, we sent out a consultation document, which is in Appendix 1 or 2, I can't remember which one, Appendix 1. And we did some drop-in sessions as well, so anybody could come into Willows and ask questions of officers about the proposal. In terms of the outcomes of the consultation, they are set out in Appendix 2. We had a number of responses. 3 we've discounted because these related to the closure of the daycare provision at Willows, which is unrelated, although obviously it's on the same site. But we've discounted those because that was a separate consultation around that. In terms of the others, we had 10 that were in support of the proposal. We had 10 that did not support the proposal. One respondent commented by email without answering the question. We've carefully considered all of the responses, both those in favour and those against. In terms of those that had concerns, there were a number of concerns that were cited. One was around the fact that we wouldn't have it as separate provision. Another was around the loss of the Willows identity. And then there was also concerns around the provision for the youngest children, the nursery age children, and the fact that we were reducing the places there, not the overall places, but certainly in terms of nursery places, and this links to a paper later on in today's agenda. Yes, that is true around nursery places, but that's, and we'll talk a bit more about the rationale behind that. So those were the issues. In terms of the responses in favour of the closure, I think everyone recognised that the viability of the provision is really important. We have an academy trust that oversees a number of special schools in the city, including Cliffdale Primary Academy, which is outstanding provision. We are not losing this provision. The staff that are currently based at Willows will cheaply across to Solent to continue to deliver that provision. And of course there are significant benefits by being part of that larger model and that relationship between the current Willows site and Cliffdale Primary Academy. So for all those reasons, and also the reason around financial viability, the recommendation is still to go ahead with the proposal, which means that we would move to the publication and representation stages of the statutory process to close Willows Centre for Children.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Does anyone else want to add anything to that or ask any questions? I mean, it has come to cabinet meetings before these stages. There has been a decision. Again, I do want to make some points. I do agree with the direction of travel, but I do think it's really important that we see that these financial pressures force us in a way to make decisions, which in a world where there is a lot more money might be a bit different. And I think actually we could be quite proud of the fact that we have this unique we have had this unique offer in the city. And I just want to say also that I did go and visit the school because I wanted to make a decision with the knowing and having spoken to the people who are going to be most affected by this. And it was a really interesting discussion, and I think the school is as Mike said, reluctantly supported because of the viability of moving forward. So I just wanted to make that point, and I want to also place on record my thanks to the head teacher for managing this process really well, but also to all the staff who work there. Which comes on to the points that are raised in the objections to this around identity, and I think I can empathise with that, especially having been a teacher myself. I respect people who fight their corner, and I respect the fact that people who professionally feel that they have concerns about whether what they're doing can be carried forward. And I think the most important thing about this is that the way this story will unravel is that there will be an outstanding school that is actually incorporating that provision, and that those commissioned places will still be there for those young, vulnerable people. So I know it's not an easy decision, but I think we actually have the main players on board with this, albeit not as a, cheering from the rooftops. The next in a way, we want two items to be delivered simultaneously, because actually what I want to just say here before we go on to the next item is that there is an opportunity here to look at this provision for children at nursery age within the city, and I'm very optimistic that we can take this situation and make something very positive with it. So that's the main point that I wanted to make. Mike.
But just add one thing. I should have just mentioned that this the final sort of decision around Willows is also dependent on the Secretary of State approving the business case that Solent Academies Trust will be presenting to what's called the Head Teacher Board, which advises the Regional Schools Commissioner about this proposal. So they will need confirmation that you're going to recommend that we go to the next stage, but equally they have to put their business case in. So all of that is dependent on those two processes.
Very good point, an essential point in this. So they can't do their bit till I've done my bit. So let's get on with that. So the recommendations is that I consider the responses to the pre-statutory consultation carried out on the proposal to close Willows Centre for Children, but to continue to deliver the specialist provision provided by Willows as part of an expanded Cliffdale Primary Academy, and authorise the Director for Children, Families and Education to proceed to the publication and representation stages of the statutory process to close Willows Centre for Children, which I do. And probably a good point at this time to mention the fact that Alison came in, but I don't think I allowed you to introduce yourself, so...
Alison Jeffrey, Director, Children, Families and Education.
Who will be doing that? I just thought it was worthwhile saying. Okay, so that is item 4. So we now come on to item 5, which is the Early Years SEND funding review. So now I go to Anthony.
Thank you. As you've already noted, this item relates in part to the discussions around the Willows Centre for Children proposals. With the proposal to close and remodel the way in which those places are delivered, it gave the local authority an opportunity to look at how we best support our very youngest children who have complex needs. As part of a review we've undertaken alongside the work to review the Willows, we've come up with a number of recommendations that we're seeking approval to move forward with. As has already been explained in the previous paper, we are anticipating the continued commissioning of a number of nursery places for 2-, 3 and 4-year-olds through a new model with Solent Academies. That will continue to offer parents the opportunity to take a specialist place where they and the workers around them feel that is meeting the best needs of the children. With the remodelling of that, we are looking to establish a new funding stream which will support children in mainstream provision. This will allow parents to make a choice about the provision which they would seek to use. The funding would follow the child to the setting that the parent and the staff around the family best feel meets their needs. It would allow them to access their local mainstream provision, which is more able to meet the needs of working families in particular. We've had a lot of feedback from families over a large period of time regarding the offer through the specialist places at the Willows, which whilst they benefit enormously from that, the 15-hour term time only provision doesn't meet the needs of parents who need something much more flexibly. This funding offer will allow mainstream providers to better support children with the funding that they require to do that in a way that meets those needs. Secondly, this will allow us to refocus the existing Early Years Inclusion Fund, which is a statutory requirement from the Department for Education. Currently that's focused on children with higher needs in mainstream provision, but should be focused more on low and emerging needs. So this will allow us to refocus that slightly and allow us to take a greater role in early help and prevention in terms of those needs. Thirdly, we, subject to consultation, would like to refocus the allocation of funding for early years outreach to better support and underpin mainstream provision. We have a range of outreach and support functions across the city that we would like to consolidate into a single outreach offer, which allows providers to understand what they can access and when they can access that, and which focuses as much on low and emerging needs as it does on the high and complex needs. And then finally, we propose to review our existing training and development opportunities. Children with SEND do very well in Portsmouth currently, above the national average in terms of their good level of development at the end of year R, and we want to make sure that we continue to underpin that good quality, but we need to do that in a way that better meets family needs and dynamics moving forward.
Thank you very much, Anthony. It's a very good, clear report. Does anyone else want to add anything to that? Hopefully that makes more sense now, what I was saying in the previous report. I actually am very optimistic about those changes, and about it moves that whole inclusion agenda forward, and better able to support people in those at those early stages, which hopefully will then reap rewards as those children transition into early years and mainstream schools. So, if there's no other comments, let me find if I can find this. The recommendations for this are: Cabinet member approved the following changes to funding and support. So, first of all, the first one was the commissioning of places for early years children with complex SEND through specialist provision at Cliffdale Primary Academy, subject to the conclusion of the current consultation, which can now go ahead. Now I've made the previous decision. Secondly, to establish a single funding stream for mainstream early years providers, which has two elements. One is an enhanced and one is a core offer funding streams. The third one is subject to consultation with the current service providers, refocus the allocation of funding to early years outreach on a resource which can consistently deliver practical support and role modelling to settings across the spectrum of needs. SEND outreach officer role will be managed either through the early years area Senko team or Portage Plus. And fourthly, to review existing training and development opportunities for mainstream early years providers to ensure that they meet the needs of children and the settings they access. I'm happy to do all that. So, last but not least, I believe, is item 6, which is the school organisation suite of documents. Caroline's not here,
Yeah,
so
Caroline's
it's over
not
to
here, so
Mike.
it's me again. This is pretty straightforward. So this relates to the 4 school organisation documents which are attached as an appendix. That includes the school organisation policy, the primary school place strategy, secondary school place strategy, and also the SEND provision place strategy. These are strategy documents that cover a 6-year period. They are helping us to take short to medium term actions to address sufficiency issues across those 3 phases, but they're also about planning for the future beyond that. And these documents obviously will be updated, but at the moment they are for a 6-year period. Just to reflect on the purposes, so they are around helping us to commission additional school places to meet increasing demand. You've heard about from previous papers around the work we've been doing to support additional places in the primary sector. We're now obviously implementing now a secondary expansion phase, and we're also doing a lot of work with our special schools and with mainstream to look at special school places through the remodelling of our special schools and potentially some additional places also. They also help us to deliver our statutory duties because it is the local authority that has the statutory responsibility for ensuring there are sufficient school places in the city to make sure that every child of school age whose parents and carers wish them to have a school place can access one. And we also have refreshed our policy on managing school organisation, and this takes into account all structural changes, whether it's an academy transfer, a hard federation of 2 schools, an amalgamation, a change in designation, etc., etc. And we've set that all out in this refreshed school organisation document. So those are the 4 documents, and we are recommending them for approval.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone want to add anything to that? No? So I've got a fancy version of them. They all fit together nicely in a kind of circle when you put them out. So but the contents are the most important thing. So I know that Caroline's not here today, but I'd like to publicly thank her for this. I have used these documents already a lot. They contain a lot of a really good balance between a kind of visionary kind and the principles of what we're doing, but actually a load of content as well with specific schools mentioned. So they have been really, really good for me. So thank you to her for doing that. And it is a really difficult thing to do because there's so many variables involved, you know, birth rates and people moving in and out and housing developments and, you know, buildings, conditions, etc. So it's not an exact science, but we do have that statutory responsibility. So it's really crucial that we have really good plans in place, and I think those are. So I am more than happy. Let me get the wording right. To approve the suite of school organisation documents which underpin the council's approach to ensuring sufficient school places in the city. Thank you. And I believe that brings us to the end of this Cabinet Education meeting. So thank you very much, everyone, for your reports. Thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day. How many more meetings have you got, Mike? Thank you.